On our 5th wedding anniversary, she and I had planned a romantic trip to see the sunrise in Colorado, a dream we'd both shared since we got married. But when I discovered the plane tickets hidden in her drawer, I didn't immediately confront her. I assumed it was part of a surprise. But instead, she came home that evening with a message saying she was leaving for a business trip. Confused, I spent the rest of the night scrolling through her first love social media. That's when I found it, a post from him, with a picture of the two of them kissing on a mountaintop, accompanied by the caption, "I made a wish 7 years ago to see the sunrise over the mountains with the person I love. Heaven has smiled upon me, and that wish has finally come true." My heart dropped. It was then that I realized everything I had suspected was true. I didn't confront her, didn't yell, or demand an explanation. I had been chasing after her for years, and I was beyond exhausted. I messaged my boss, telling him I was ready to take the transfer to Australia. It wasn't about avoiding the problem anymore. It was about escaping the suffocating disappointment I had been living with. Later, as I packed my bags, she came in, asking, "John, where are you going?" Her face showed no sign of guilt, only surprise. "Business trip," I muttered. Then she handed me a gift, a men's watch, the one I had mentioned liking once while flipping through a magazine. "I was so busy with work the other day that I forgot to give it to you," she said, placing it on my wrist. I forced a smile and thanked her, but I was numb. I continued packing, not even fazed by the watch or the explanation she had prepared. The truth was stuck in her throat, and I was too tired to care. I had always thought I'd never be able to stay calm if I found out she cheated on me. But now, the revelation seemed almost inevitable. When I found the plane tickets in her drawer on our anniversary, I had felt a surge of excitement, hoping she had finally planned the honeymoon we'd put off for years. But when she came home, rushing straight to the bedroom without acknowledging me, all my hopes crumbled. She had taken the tickets with her, lying that she had a last-minute business trip. I looked around at the house I had decorated with roses, waiting for her to come back and be surprised. But she hadn't even noticed. The anniversary I had planned for was just a cruel joke, and as I sat on the sofa, staring at the moonlight outside, I felt a weight settle in my chest. I couldn't sleep all night, not until 6 a.m., when I opened a social media app and saw the post. Mark and she had gone to Colorado, just like we had planned, but without me. And that was the moment I realized. She had gone to see the sunrise with Mark. I had completely stopped drinking ever since I met her. Even during business dinners, I chose tea over alcohol, but after seeing that photo, something inside me snapped. I didn't want to keep accommodating her anymore. I finished packing my suitcase and started to gather the rest of my things, ready to leave. My legs were stiff from sitting too long, so I stood up, massaged them, and walked into the living room. She stood there, watching me, with an expression I couldn't quite read. "John, are you just going to leave like this?" she asked, her tone complicated, almost as if she were waiting for me to explain myself. I turned around, puzzled. "What else should I do?" I asked. "Should I still draw you a bath after your long day like I used to?" I didn't want to play along anymore, didn't want to pretend everything was fine when it was anything but. As I sat back down on the sofa, my phone buzzed with a message from my boss. It was a simple question, but it felt loaded with concern. "John, I've known you for years, so I need to confirm. Are you really set on transferring to Australia? You've turned me down so many times for Anne, and I'm still a bit worried. Just want to double check." I smiled, though it felt strained. "It's real. I'm going to Australia. Don't worry, boss, I've made up my mind this time." A year ago, the company had established a branch in Australia, and a director position had been vacant ever since. My boss had offered it to me several times, saying it was a golden opportunity and urging me to take it. Honestly, I was tempted. The transfer meant a promotion and a doubled salary. But the only thing holding me back had always been Anne. Her past was complicated. Her mother had abandoned her when she was young, and her father had a new family who didn't care about her. She was only 10 when her grandmother brought her to live next door to us. I still remember the Mid-Autumn Festival, when I first saw her sitting alone in front of her house, looking lost and full of envy. She lowered her head when she noticed me watching, pretending she didn't care. But I felt a pang of pity and couldn't just leave her there. I went back inside, grabbed a lantern, and offered it to her. Want to play lanterns with me? It's no fun alone. I handed it to her, and she reached out to take it with a surprised expression. We walked around the neighborhood with our lanterns, and I saw the faintest smile on her face. That was how we spent the loneliest days of our youth. But once we went off to college, we lost touch. It wasn't until a year after graduation that I saw her again, standing under a streetlight in our old neighborhood, wearing a red coat. When I saw her standing there, everything felt like it had stopped. She looked just as I remembered. "John, long time no see," she said. It was like nothing had changed. And then, without warning, she kissed me. My heart was pounding. After a few seconds, she pulled away and looked at me, asking, "John, can I be your girlfriend?" Without thinking, I said yes. I mentally kicked myself for agreeing so quickly, but she knew I had always liked her. She had done it on purpose. And just like that, we were married. I remember the first time I told her about the potential transfer to Australia. She was quiet for a long time. Later that night, she drank in front of me for the first time, her eyes red and whispering, "John, are you going to leave me too?" I kept turning down my boss's suggestions to transfer, afraid that it would remind her of the abandonment she'd faced as a child. But in the end, I was the one who was left behind. As I looked out at the moonlight, the heartbreak sank in. My boss, sensing something was off, asked cautiously, "Did something happen between you and Anne?" I didn't answer, which was an unspoken admission of what had happened. After a while, he messaged again, "The past is beyond remedy, but the future is ours to pursue. John, just be yourself. Your flight is at the end of the month. Take the month to rest and recover." When Anne came out of the bathroom with the watch, I remembered how I used to jump to put on any gift she gave me. I'd always post a picture to show it off. But now, the gift seemed meaningless. She sat next to me with the watch in her hands, her tone softening. "Let's take a picture and post it," she said. I paused, then shook my head. "No, I don't want to seem unprofessional to my clients." She tossed the watch aside, impatient. "John, are you serious? Are you still mad about what happened a month ago? Didn't I explain? We just had a few drinks at dinner and fell asleep there. Besides, other friends were there. What could possibly happen between Mark and me?" I felt my frustration building. How could she still be so unaware of how much this hurt me? A month ago, I never imagined I would feel so foolish, but there it was. I had forgotten how reckless I had been, caught up in the whirlwind of emotions and doubts, and didn't come home that night, causing me so much worry that I barely slept, asking everyone I knew if they'd seen her. I was frantic, and when I finally found her at her usual spa, I didn't care who else was there. I walked in and found her sleeping in Mark's arms. I didn't care that there were other people in the room. All I could see was her, in his arms. I didn't even wait to hear their excuses. I had a huge fight with Anne, and she downplayed it, saying she had just had too much to drink. Her friends tried to mediate. Yeah, we were all there. What could they have done? Besides, we've been friends with Anne for so long. We don't even see her as a woman. It's just the purest form of friendship. Absolutely. But the truth was, during their previous gatherings, I'd overheard her friends teasing, "You two look at each other with so much love in your eyes. Why don't you just get back together?" Not once did Anne deny it. I stormed out that day, my thoughts a whirlpool of anger and confusion. At first, Anne tried to soothe me, saying, "I only see Mark as a friend, and nothing happened between us." But her words felt hollow. Later, she simply said, "If there was anything between me and him, there wouldn't be anything between you and me." I had been blind. Seeing my wife sleeping in another man's arms and then being accused of being petty for being upset about it was a level of emotional turmoil I wasn't prepared for. We entered a Cold War until our 5th anniversary. I thought the anniversary would be her way of making up for everything, but it turned out to be the final straw. Looking back, I realized how ridiculous I was being. I looked at Anne, who was now getting more and more agitated, and said calmly, "You're overthinking it." I continued, acting surprised when her usual words came out of my mouth. "Are you really not mad?" she asked, her brow furrowing in disbelief. "Why would I be mad?" I asked, my tone measured. Before she could respond, I added, "I had some drinks. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight." Her face darkened. She stood up abruptly, tossed her words out with a resigned tone, "Suit yourself," and stormed off to the bedroom. I didn't understand. I wasn't throwing a tantrum. I wasn't being jealous. I wasn't pressing her for answers. Wasn't this what she wanted? The next morning, Anne did something unprecedented. She cooked. She brought a bowl of lean meat congee to the table and called me over. "You're awake. I made your favorite congee. Come eat." I was stunned. Growing up, she had no one to cook for her. She'd cooked for herself as an adult, but had never made food for me except when I was hospitalized. That one time, when I had appendicitis, she brought me homemade congee, and it was the best I had ever tasted. I remembered how she would scowl when I asked her to make it again, always telling me, "If you want it, make it yourself or buy it. I'm not your maid." I thought I had reminded her of painful memories, so I stopped asking. But now, as I scrolled through Mark's social media, I saw a different story. Back when they were together, and had cooked for Mark because he didn't like cafeteria food. She rented an apartment just to cook for him every day, bringing the food to him at school. Later, after Mark moved to the city, she still cooked for their friends' gatherings. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the love she shared with him, and I realized that I was just a footnote in their love story. Then, Anne came over and pulled out a chair for me, her voice unusually gentle. "John, let's have some fun these next few days. Didn't you say you wanted to see that play? I'll book the tickets, and we can go together." I found it a bit funny. She had already seen the play, but pretended not to know about it. Some time ago, a playwright I had admired for years finally came to our city, and I bought extra tickets, hoping Anne would go with me. But she had told me she couldn't make it because she had to work overtime. Then, on Mark's social media, there was a post. "Thank you to my princess for taking time out of her busy schedule to watch the play with me. Love you so much." The accompanying video was of them together at the play, interspersed with photos of them, smiling and happy. I didn't say anything. I focused on my meal, refusing to let her see how much it hurt, and started booking tickets, still trying to go through the motions. But I shook my head, not wanting to continue the charade. "No, I don't want to seem unprofessional to my clients," I said, hoping she would take the hint. She tossed the watch aside impatiently. "John, are you serious? Are you still mad about what happened a month ago? Didn't I explain? We just had a few drinks at dinner and fell asleep there. Besides, other friends were there. What could possibly happen between Mark and me?" As I stared at Anne, I could barely contain my disappointment. I had hoped for something, anything, more from her, but now I just felt numb. Looking at the wallpaper on my phone, I muttered, "His tour for this year is already over," and froze, her finger hovering over the screen as if unsure of what to say next. After a long, awkward pause, she finally spoke, guilt evident in her voice. "I'm sorry, John. I promise I'll go with you next year." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "You said the same thing last year," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. The atmosphere in the room thickened with the weight of my words. Anne's face slowly paled as she waited for me to react, but I said nothing. I simply stood up, grabbed my suitcase, and calmly said, "I'm going to work." I thought she would start a Cold War with me, like she had in the past, but instead, she messaged me in the afternoon, saying she would pick me up for dinner that evening. I didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't the first time she had ditched me for Mark. There was one time I had a business dinner and had a few drinks, so I called her, asking if she could pick me up. On her way, she got a call from Mark. He said he had a cold and was feeling miserable, asking if she could bring him some medicine. After hanging up, she flustered, told me to find my own way home because she had to go deliver medicine to Mark. She hung up immediately after. I had even gotten a speeding ticket that night, driving through the cold, feeling an ice-cold chill that had nothing to do with the weather. By the time I got home at 1 a.m., she still wasn't back. She didn't return until morning. So, I had long since given up on her. But then, when I left for work the next day, Anne's car was waiting outside. As I got closer, I realized Mark was sitting in the passenger seat. Of course, that wasn't anything new, but what caught my attention was Anne leaning in, her face inches away from Mark's. He looked uncomfortable, and Anne was gently blowing on his eyes, putting in eye drops for him. I could feel the anger building up inside me. My fists clenched at my sides, nails digging into my palms. The pain was real, and so was the ache in my heart. Half of my youth had been spent on Anne, and all I got in return was this, being trampled on. A car drove by and honked, snapping and out of the moment. She looked up, and I saw a flash of embarrassment on her face. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I simply looked at her, no words coming to me. "Get in the car," she ordered. I walked up to the car window, took off my wedding ring, and held it in front of her. Letting go of it, I said calmly, "Let's get a divorce." For a moment, and seemed stunned. But as soon as she processed my words, she ran after me, grabbing my arm. "You want a divorce?" she asked, voice tight with disbelief. I handed her the divorce papers I had already prepared, and her expression turned to anger. She ripped the papers apart and yelled, "You're playing the divorce card again. I told you." His eyes were bothering him. I was just putting in his eye drops. "Is that really worth a divorce? You think threatening me with divorce works? It's really annoying." Mark, of course, had to get involved. He rushed over to me, looking remorseful. "John, you really misunderstood. Anne and I are just friends. If it bothers you, I can just walk back myself." He reached out to take my arm, but I violently shoved him away. "Don't touch me," I spat, my voice a mix of anger and hurt. Mark stumbled backward, nearly falling over, and rushed to steady him, then turned to me, her tone condescending. "Putting in eye drops is such a small thing. Why are you so narrow-minded? What exactly are you upset about?" At that moment, everything hit me like a ton of bricks. The blatant favoritism, the lies, the emotional betrayal. I stood there, still in disbelief, and gave Mark a look and said coldly, "Let's go. He wants a divorce. Let's see how long he keeps this up." She got in the car, and I watched them drive off, my heart sinking deeper with every passing second. The sky above darkened, and thunder rumbled in the distance. I walked in the opposite direction, the rain pouring down on me, but I didn't care. It was the second time I had brought up divorce with Anne. The day Mark moved here, she had lied, saying she was working overtime, only to go meet him. I knew in my gut that something was wrong. And then I found out about Mark, her first love. As I walked alone in the rain, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything. The lies, the betrayals, the broken promises. How had things come to this? I told her she was being inappropriate with Mark and that she had no boundaries. She retorted that I didn't respect her privacy, accusing me of snooping through her phone and being overly suspicious. In a fit of anger, I brought up divorce. She didn't try to appease me, and then she didn't come home for several days. I was anxious and restless, unable to sleep for nights on end. In the end, I was the one to back down. I apologized, saying I shouldn't have looked at her phone and shouldn't have doubted her over something so trivial. Only then did she return home, strutting like a victorious rooster, confident that I wouldn't leave her. She knew how much I loved her, and she was sure I couldn't walk away. But the disappointment had built up, and my love for her was gone, just like before, and didn't come home for several days. This time, I actually felt relieved. I used the time to prepare for my move to Australia, buying necessary items and printing out documents. On the 5th day, I got a call from Anne's best friend, Sarah. "John, Anne's drunk. Can you come pick her up?" she asked. "No, we're getting a divorce. It's not appropriate." Sarah hesitated before replying, "But she keeps calling your name. Don't you want to see her?" I scoffed, "Then you must be drunk too." The last time she was drunk, she was calling Mark's name. The sound of glass shattering came through the phone before I hung up, without a second thought. It wasn't until the next morning that I saw Mark outside my door. As soon as he saw me, he apologized, and got really drunk yesterday and threw up all over herself. I had to come get some clothes for her. He sighed, clearly annoyed. I told her to come back, but she wouldn't. "What are you two fighting about?" Then he tugged at his collar, revealing a hickey on his neck. I suppressed my disgust. "What? You're proud of being the other man. Didn't your mother teach you any decency?" I snapped. Mark's face turned ugly. He shoved me aside and walked into my apartment. Anne and I were together first. This was supposed to be our home. The one who isn't loved is the third wheel. You have no right to talk to me like that, he spat. His words hit me like a slap in the face. He shoved me with considerable force, and my head hit the wall. The impact made me feel weak, but I turned around, grabbed his clothes, and was about to throw him out when Anne came back. She stood in front of Mark, her face dark with fury. Are you going to keep this up? She demanded. Bullying him once or twice isn't enough. Try touching him again, she added. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. In a moment of rage, I punched the door instead, then shoved them both out of my house. Get out, both of you. Get out of my house. I screamed as I slammed the door shut. I slid down to the floor and broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Not long after, Anne pushed the door open forcefully and rushed in. She grabbed my hand and examined it carefully. Why did you punch the wall? Doesn't it hurt? Look, you broke the skin, she said, her tone concerned. She pulled out a tube of ointment and gently applied it to my hand. But I pulled it away, shoving her back. I don't want your fake concern. She stared at me with hurt in her eyes. I'm your wife. How is caring for you being fake? She asked softly. I already told you I want a divorce. Don't you understand? I said, my voice flat. She looked at me, her expression pained, before she yelled, just because I put eye drops in Mark's eyes, you insist on a divorce? Fine. I admit I was wrong. I'm sorry. I didn't consider your feelings. What more do you want? From now on, I'll keep my distance from Mark. Her words grew more heated as she spoke, eventually sweeping everything off the dining table in frustration. I watched her face contort in anger, and something clicked inside me. In all these years, I had never truly understood her. She thought that as long as I hadn't personally seen her in bed with Mark, she could act as if nothing had happened. She could stand on moral high ground and accuse me of being unreasonable. She wanted me to bow my head and continue loving her as if nothing had changed. I took a deep breath and clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. I softened my expression, took her hand, and said quietly, if you can go a week without contacting Mark or seeing him, then we won't get a divorce. Her face lit up instantly with a smile. It's that simple, she asked. Yes, it's that simple. But deep down, I knew she couldn't do it. The next day, Anne started coming home early. On the first day, she brought me my favorite spicy hot pot from the place I liked. The second day, she canceled a gathering and went to the movies with me. The third day, she accompanied me on a walk by the beach. On the fourth day, we had dinner at home, and she cooked. But on the fifth day, I set up an appointment with Mark. When he arrived, an hour late, he immediately mocked me. Why aren't you at home watching it? You have time to meet me? Are you going to warn me not to see her? Sorry, but I can't control her friendships. A smug smile played on his lips as he added, I'm going to steal your wife. What are you going to do about it? I stood up abruptly, my anger boiling over. I punched him squarely in the face. The room fell silent, and Mark's breathing grew heavy. Why did you hit me? He asked, incredulous. I sat down calmly, took a sip of water, and replied, You went on a trip with my wife, kissed her. Shouldn't I hit you? His expression stiffened. Then he sneered, You're just finding out now? I posted those videos for you to see. Since you saw them, it wasn't a waste of my time posting them. A marriage certificate can't lock down feelings. I looked at him coldly. As you wish. Anne and I are getting a divorce. Before his triumphant smile could last 3 seconds, I turned and walked out. I continued, but she didn't agree. She said that if she could go a week without contacting Mark, without seeing him, then I couldn't bring up divorce again. Today was the last day of the deadline I had set. Seeing the disappointment and resentment on Mark's face gave me a surge of vindictive pleasure. Let's see if you have what it takes to make her break our agreement. I stood up, smiled at him, and said, I'll be waiting. Mark shouted at my back, John, just you wait. That evening, Anne came home on time, as usual. Perhaps because it was the last day of the deadline I had set, she was in an unusually good mood. As soon as she walked in, she took my arm and said softly, John, let's go to the restaurant where we had our first date today. Let's make up for our 5th anniversary. We arrived at the restaurant and sat at the same table. The warm light fell on her face, making her look exceptionally beautiful. It felt like a return to the slightly aloof girl she used to be. Back then, watching me clumsily cut my steak, she had smiled and said, "John, why are you still so clumsy?" I knew and was a smart woman. After breaking free from her family, she had used her expertise to start a business with a classmate during college, achieving financial freedom and escaping the days of feast or famine. She could also be very romantic. I remembered how she once produced a bouquet of lawn-thus flowers out of nowhere and placed it on the table. "Boys can receive flowers too," she had said. "Let's celebrate our first date." Back to the present, the same bouquet of lawn-thus flowers was placed in the same spot on the table, and the same set meal was served. "We hope you have a wonderful evening," the waiter said as the lights dimmed and music started playing. The atmosphere was perfect, but just then, Anne's phone rang. Without even looking, I knew it was Mark. Her expression turned flustered as she quickly hung up, but the call persisted. At the right moment, I stood up. "I'm going to the restroom," I said. As I walked away, I could hear Mark's desperate voice from afar. "I know you still have feelings for me. Why haven't you been answering my calls these past few days? I want to see you. I want to see you one last time." Anne's voice tightened as she urgently responded, "Don't talk nonsense." "What do you mean one last time?" she asked. Mark didn't answer directly but kept repeating, "I want to see you one last time. Just once," and grabbed her bag and was about to leave when she bumped into me. She pursed her lips, avoiding my gaze. "John, I'm sorry. Mark's not in a good state of mind. I can't just ignore him. I'll go see him and come back to have dinner with you soon." I asked, "Do you have to go? Today is the last day." She paused for a moment, and her gaze gradually turned cold. "John, I remember you used to be very empathetic. Why are you being so petty with someone who might be in danger? I promise I'll just go check on him and come right back." With that, she hurried out the door, got into a cab, and quickly disappeared from sight. I sat back down and calmly finished my dinner. When I got home, I placed the already signed divorce papers on the table, grabbed my packed luggage, and closed the door behind me. While waiting at the airport to board, I received a message from Mark. It was a photo of Anne, her shoulders bare, lying in bed with him. Below the photo, it read, "You lost. She's with me tonight. She's not coming back. Just get the divorce already. What do you have to compete with me?" He was gloating, showing off his victory. I smiled. As I had wished, he had won, but I hadn't lost. I saved the photo and sent it to Anne with the message, "I've already signed the divorce papers." I then blocked both of them on all platforms. Everything went smoothly after I arrived in Australia. Work progressed according to my plans. The house I rented had a large pool, and my neighbors were friendly. I thought and would take this opportunity to get together with Mark, but to my surprise, a month later, she showed up in Sydney. I saw her waiting outside my house after work. I hadn't seen her in a while. She had lost a lot of weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She looked haggard, a stark contrast to her previously vibrant self. In my memory, she always presented herself well, no matter the situation. This version of her felt unfamiliar. My heart didn't hold any vengeful glee or aching pity. I felt the same way I would toward an ordinary friend. As she approached, I walked around her and opened the door. She suddenly reached out and grabbed my arm. "John, I'm sorry. Things aren't what they seemed. Give me a chance. Let me explain." I shook my head and said calmly, "It doesn't matter anymore." She paused. Her face reddened as she began to sob. "It does matter. You can't condemn me to death over one photo. There should be an appeal." As I stood at the door, watching Anne's face twist with confusion and pain, I felt a strange detachment. Her voice trembled as she tried to justify her actions, but I had already heard enough. "John, please, don't you see? Mark was just a mistake from my past. It wasn't what you think. I love you, not him. I was wrong. I promise I'll never contact him again. Just let me make it up to you, please." Her words felt empty, as if the truth was already too clear for us both to deny. I looked at her, my expression cold but with a hint of sadness. I had spent so many years loving her, forgiving her, giving her second chances, but somewhere along the way, the love had faded. "And," I said, my voice steady but firm. I don't love you anymore. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, she looked as though I had struck her. Her face turned pale, and she staggered back, her eyes wide in disbelief. What do you mean? How could you just stop loving me? You can't. You can't not love me. Her voice was desperate, pleading, but I had already made my decision. I don't owe you any more of my love, I said calmly, turning toward the door. We're done. Let's have a clean break. Don't disturb my life anymore. You're free to go. You can love whoever you want. And stood frozen, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and frustration. She couldn't accept it. I couldn't accept how she had broken me time and time again. As she stood there, I walked to the door and opened it, signaling that it was over. But she refused to leave, standing her ground, pleading that she couldn't live without me. It was maddening. She had spent so much time with Mark, and now she was saying she couldn't live without me? The hypocrisy of it all stung. I turned to call the property management, instructing them to escort her out of my life for good. I didn't want to see her face anymore. Not in my life. Not in my future. Weeks passed, and Anne's persistence only grew. She rented an apartment nearby, trying to win me back with flowers and gifts, each time pushing me further away. I had made my peace, or so I thought, until one day my neighbor Ellie returned from a trip with a souvenir for me, and stormed up to me, accusing me of being with Ellie. Her voice was full of rage and jealousy, demanding to know if this was why I had been rejecting her. I suppressed the anger that surged inside me. Don't project your dirty thoughts onto me, I said calmly. I'm not you. I still have a sense of decency, especially since we're not divorced yet. Her face flushed with shame, and she apologized, but it was too late. I stood my ground, the finality of my decision clear. Sign the divorce papers, and she was silent for a long moment before tears started to fall. Do I really have no chance at all? She asked quietly. I answered firmly, no. She turned slowly, her thin figure shrinking as she walked away, disappearing into the sunset. A week later, the divorce papers arrived in the mail, signed by her name. A year passed, and I was promoted to general manager at my new branch in Australia. My life felt lighter, freer, and when I looked in the mirror, I felt younger than before. I was finally living for myself. I traveled the world, seeing sights I'd never imagined. And one day, as I stood under the stars in Paris, I received a message from a friend back home. John, Mark went crazy. He attacked Ashton with a fruit knife, saying and would never be able to leave him. After you left, he kept pressuring her to marry him, but she refused. She's in the hospital now. Do you want to go see her? I smiled, my heart untouched by her suffering. I'm traveling the world, I replied. If I happen to be in her city, I'll visit her. But flowers bloom toward the sun, and people move forward. No one waits forever. The message lingered in my mind as I walked away. Life was moving on, and I was finally free. Was the final decision to leave and truly an act of self-preservation? Or was it the culmination of years of emotional betrayal? Do you think John's complete detachment at the end was justified? Or did he let his own pride and hurt cloud his judgment? What would you have done in his shoes? Forgive one last time or walk away for good? Share your thoughts on love, trust, and the breaking point in relationships.